We have been journeying through 1 Peter for quite a while now, basically since the beginning of the year. And we've got this week and then next week, and then we're going to take a 3-week break, and we're going to do a short series over Easter called Does It Even Matter? Where we'll be talking about the incarnation, the death of Christ, and the resurrection of Christ. So, and after that Easter series, we will jump back into 1 Peter. So 1 Peter 2, verses 13 through 17 today. So let me read that for us. Be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme or to governors as sent by him to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God. Honor everyone. Love the brotherhood. Fear God. Honor the emperor. So, like I said, we have an easy topic for today's text. We're going to step into the intersection of religion and politics. Today, we're going to talk about the government. And so here's what I need to do for us to start. I need everyone to pull out their phones and turn it off, because we know that they're listening, all right? I'm just kidding. I'm actually really excited to talk about this text. The reality is there has always been friction between these two worlds, right? Even among Christians, this intersection is widely and sometimes passionately debated. I imagine that even in our little church, if I asked you, how much should we talk about politics and government in the church? I would imagine that there would be a group of people on opposite sides of that spectrum. In fact, every church I've ever been a part of, there has always been one group that will say, well, I think the church should not talk about politics at all. And then another group that will say the church should be informed and equipped every single week on what's happening in our political and cultural world. So there is friction even among believers when it comes to how the church should or should not engage with politics. But also, there has always been friction between the church and government institutions in one way or another. And we need to consider that this friction between religion and politics, it isn't just a modern issue. It has been a reality throughout church history. Augustus, anybody ever heard of Augustus? When he was Caesar, he claimed that he was God, and therefore he was a son of God. So what do you do if you're a Christian and a political leader is claiming to be a son of God? What do? Consider Herod. Consider Herod. 4 people from the east show up because a star showed them a Messiah. A king has been born in Herod's region. From Herod's perspective, this king that has been born is a political threat. So what does he do? He murders every little boy under the age of 2. So even Jesus' arrival was seen as a threat to the government. And especially today, we have to admit that there is tension when we think about the church and politics. But guess what? That tension that we feel today was there when Peter wrote this letter over 2,000 years ago. They felt it too. So here's what I want to do before we jump into the text. I want to give us an overview of the context of the early church. This early church lived and operated within perhaps the most powerful government in history, the Roman Empire, okay? And I think if we can grasp their tension in their circumstances, then that will help us understand why Peter is saying what he is saying. And I think it will give us perspective on how we are to navigate our world that is filled with tension when it comes to the intersection of church and politics. So let's talk about Rome for a second, okay? Rome at this point in history has done a lot of good things in the world. Rome has created opportunity for the common person that no one in history had done to this point. They created roads that allowed for travel. Ever heard the phrase, all roads lead to Rome? Anybody? They offered protection under the Roman banner from those that would threaten you. They cleared all the pirates out of the Mediterranean. Before Rome, you were subject to any raiding party. They could just come in and pillage you. So if someone showed up in your town or village, you had no one to protect you. But if you lived in Rome, they had to go through Rome to get to you. You ever heard of the Pax Romana, that Rome brought peace? So because of Rome, they were safe from outside threats. Not only that, Rome created order and structure for their people. They instituted a common language, so now you can communicate with people. And because of these roads and this language and everyone being able to have new opportunities, like you could sell your crops and become wealthy. There was opportunity for economic growth. So Rome created opportunity for success and safety because they brought stability that had not been there before. They had a court system. So if someone wronged you, you had someone to go to try to seek justice for that wrong. So for these believers that Peter's talking to, we have to first understand that there is a lot of good that Rome brought to their society. Yet, at the same time, Rome was absolutely brutal. They were absolutely brutal. If you did not submit to their authority, they would just wipe you out. We have accounts of Rome just straight up wiping out entire communities. They committed genocide multiple times. And the Caesars, oh man, the Caesars, okay? If you ever want to read a good thriller or a good drama, just read about the Caesars, right? So almost everything we know about ancient Rome is based on three ancient writers, Suetonius, Pliny the Younger, and Tacitus. Each of them had their own writing style. So Tacitus was like a New York Times style reporter. Pliny the Younger was like NPR, and Suetonius was like TMZ, okay? So if you want the real drama, just pick up a book by Suetonius, right? So let me tell you, the Caesars that ruled during Peter's time were absolutely nuts. They make any of our political leaders from the last 300 years look like saints. Augustus reigned for 40 years, and then they gave the kingdom over to someone named Tiberius. Tiberius, who ruled during the time of Jesus, when he took over Rome, he just killed all of his rivals, just straight up murdered them. And then he moved to an island that he specially created so that he could abuse children. And then when he was done with them, he would throw them off the side of a cliff. He was an evil man. He adopted a boy named Caligula. And Tiberius would constantly make fun of Caligula because Tiberius had murdered his entire family. And then one night, Tiberius mysteriously suffocated in the middle of the night. Allegedly, right? Caligula became king, and believe it or not, he was way worse than Tiberius. He would invite people over to dinner just so that he could take advantage of their wife. There's one story about him showing up at a wedding where he interrupts the wedding and says, "Hey, I want the wife." Marries the wife, takes her home, divorces her, gives her back to her husband the next day. 4 years later, his guards got tired of him, and so they murdered him in the middle of the street. After Caligula died, his not-so-smart uncle Claudius took over. When Claudius heard that his nephew Caligula had been murdered, he tried to hide in the palace because he thought they were going to try to kill him too. They found him because his toes were hanging outside of a curtain. He didn't cover his entire body, right? They opened the curtain, he was terrified, and the guard said, "Hail the emperor." And he's like, "Wait, seriously? Me?" Claudius was by far the dumbest emperor to ever rule. He went on to marry his niece. He married his niece. Shortly after, he released an edict to the people that basically said, "It's not weird, get over it." Okay? He was allegedly poisoned by his wife because she wanted her son to be in power, and her son's name was Nero. I'm sure some of you have heard of Nero. Nero took over when he was an emotionally unstable 16-year-old. When he got power, one of the first things he did was proceed to kill his mother. Then he killed his first wife, and then he killed his second wife by kicking her to death while she was pregnant. Felt bad about that, so he married a 13-year-old boy who looked like his late wife, kidnapped this boy, and made him dress up in his dead wife's clothes. Nero was a straight-up monster, okay? This is the government leadership that is in charge of the early Christians. They had it much worse than we did. We haven't even talked yet about how the government treated the Christians. We just sang a song that have gotten us killed at one point in history. "Behold our God, seated on his throne, come let us adore him." If we would have sang that in 110 AD, our lives would all be in danger. In fact, there's still Christians today who still face that kind of threat. Now, to be clear, at the time that Peter is writing this, persecution of the church had not become government policy yet. That's going to come pretty quick. But at this time, there was a pressure from the culture and from the government to shame the Christian. They would make them feel small and ashamed in order to get them to convert to their social norms. They would threaten your status or threaten your job. I think it kind of sounds somewhat similar to the West right now. If you're a Christian, you should feel shame, so you should conform to our way of life. So you can imagine the tension that these Christians that Peter is writing to are feeling. Now, here are the vast array of questions that we have to answer. How do we live in this kind of world? How do we live under this government that has done some good, yes, but they are also cruel and evil? How should we think about the rules and laws and policies that this government is placing? What do you do when it feels like those in power are around you are pressing in on you? What do you do when you live in a society whose vision for life are at odds with your own? What do you do when you have sworn your allegiance to a Savior and a King, and his purposes are contrary to both the government that you are under and the dominant culture around you? What do you do as a community? How do you respond to a government that does not favor you and sometimes is actively trying to shame you? Well, historically, there have been two responses by humanity. The first response is to attack, start a revolution. You violently resist the opposition. I will launch a campaign to overthrow the current government structure, and I will take power from you so that we can have power. This is what they wanted to do with Jesus after he fed the 5,000 in the Gospel of John. They wanted him to be king so they could overthrow the Roman Empire. And what did Jesus say? He said, no, I am not that kind of king. So we saw that with the French Revolution. We saw it with the Borghese when they were murdered in Russia. If I kill enough people, I can take control, and then I will have the power. It's happened numerous times throughout history. The second response that a community can have is not to attack, but to assimilate. You conform. There's too many of them, so I just give up. I say what I need to in the public square. I say what I need to when I'm out in front of others. But when I'm with people who think like I do, when I'm private with other people, I tell them what I really think, what I really believe. Privately, I will say what I really believe, but publicly, I just go with the flow. Now, are those our only two options? No. Peter, in this text, gives us a third option. We will not violently attack, and we will not conform. We will live lives of holiness, grace, and goodness that display the beauty of a better king. I will hold on to my convictions, and yet I will hold them with gentleness and love. I will not attempt to overthrow you, but I will also not conform. I will not forsake my King Jesus or the convictions that he gives me, but I will hold on to them without dishonoring you. And if needed, I will suffer, and I am willing to die for the one who saved my life. In fact, I think in last week's text and this week's text, that is what Peter is advocating. So let me read the text to you again, and let's see if you see any of that in the text. So let me read last week's text with this week's text, and just want you to listen to really try to understand and grasp what Peter is saying. So Nathan taught us last week from verses 11 and 12, Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from passions of the flesh, which wage war against your soul. Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. Be subject to for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme or to governors as sent by him to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good, you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God. Honor everyone, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the emperor. Peter's thesis is, you do not belong to this world, so don't conform to their way of life. And make no mistake, their way of life is waging war against your soul. So be aware of your conduct among them. I think he may have had the words of Jesus in his head when he wrote this. You are in this world, but you are not of this world. And because you are in this world, you are subject to human institutions. So we do not respond to those institutions with violence, but rather you respond to these institutions by doing good. And I think one question that might be helpful to ask is, so what happened with these people? How did his thesis play out? Did it work? Well, in AD 110, 40 years after the letter of 1 Peter was written, Governor Pliny writes a letter to the emperor. We have it. You can go read it online. But he essentially writes in this letter, hey, emperor, I need your advice. And he goes on to say, I have all of these people who are being brought to me for trial because they are Christians. He says, but I can't tell. I can't tell, is being a Christian a crime or do Christians commit crimes? Interesting question. He says, at their trial, I ask them, are you a Christian? If they say yes, I execute them. But if they curse Jesus Christ and worship you as God, I let them go. But he says, but here's my problem, Mr. Emperor. There are so many of them. That's what he says. Men, women, children, slaves, rich and poor. At one point, he says there are so many Christians that the temples of our gods are empty. They're deserted. He essentially says, if I keep murdering the Christians, then there's going to be no one left. Please help me. I don't know what to do. What we know from church history is that the gospel of Jesus Christ spread like wildfire. They lived in and were subject to a government institution, but they did not waver from their born-again life in Jesus Christ. They showed honor. They lived lives of gentleness and grace. Nathan said something last week that Katie and I talked about after church, and it stuck with me while I studied and thought about this text. At some point, he asked the question, how can we as God's people live beautifully distinct? And I love that. The world will look at our convictions on various political issues, and they're going to misunderstand us. They will hate us for it. That's just the reality. It could be homosexuality, it could be abortion, gender identity, and numerous of other subjects. But here's what we have to understand as the church. Our aim as the church is not to shame others in order to get them to just stop doing what they're doing. That's not our aim. Our aim is to show them that there is a more beautiful design for their lives than the one that they are living right now. So especially when we talk about politics and government as Christians, yes, we want to see policies and we want to see laws that lift up God's moral law. As a Christian, we submit to God's moral law, his design for life and what it means to be a son and daughter of the King, which informs how we live our lives, but we have to understand something. God's moral law is about the glory of God and a person's joy. God is not after anyone's begrudging submission of them. Does that make sense when I say that? God's not after anyone's begrudging submission of them. That we have to understand the framework of God's moral law is ultimately about a person's delight in God's glory. God is after displaying beauty and hope and joy to a broken world, beauty that compels. He is after displaying through a group of people his grace, displaying beauty that others can look at and go, there is a God, and he is beautiful. So check this out. We have a letter from 150 AD called the Epistle of Dionysius, okay? And remember what we just talked about with Pliny. Rome is trying to make sense of Christianity. The spread of Christianity has them shook, and they are killing Christians at every opportunity. So let me read to you this quote from 150 AD from the Epistle of Dionysius. We'll have it on the screen as well. It's rather long, so sorry about that, but I just think you need to hear it. For the Christians, this is what he says, 150 AD. For the Christians are distinguished from other men, neither by country, nor language, nor the customs which they observe. For they neither inhabit cities of their own, nor employ a peculiar, form of speech, nor lead a life which is marked out by any singularity. The course of conduct which they follow has not been devised by any speculation or deliberation of inquisitive men. Nor do they, like some, proclaim themselves the advocates of any merely human doctrines. Do you understand what he just said there? He just said, wherever we go, that's where they are, right? There isn't Christian cities, there isn't Christian language. He's saying they're everywhere. They are among us. They haven't formed their own cities. They are in every city, which was a completely new thing. Typically, religions were always just in certain areas, given over to a specific language, to a certain geography. But he's saying these people are different. He goes on, he says, but inhabiting Greek as well as barbarian cities, according as the lot of each of them has determined. And check this out. And following the customs of the natives in respect to clothing, food, and the rest of their ordinary conduct. They display to us their wonderful and confessedly striking method of life. Now here's where I want you to pay attention. What was their method of life? What was the method of life of these Christians all the way back in 150 AD? Here's what he says. They dwell in their own countries, but simply as sojourners. As citizens, they share in all things with others, and yet endure all things as if foreigners. Every foreign land is to them as their native country. Every land of their birth is a land of strangers. And check this out. They marry, as do all others. They beget children, but they do not destroy their offspring. They have a common table, but not a common bed. They are in the flesh, but they do not live after the flesh. They pass their days on earth, but they are citizens of heaven. They obey the prescribed laws, and at the same time surpass the laws by their lives. They love all men and are persecuted by all. They are unknown and condemned. They are put to death and restored to life. They are poor, yet make many rich. They are in lack of all things, and yet abound in all things. They are dishonored, and yet in their very dishonor are glorified. They are evil spoken of, and yet are justified. They are reviled and bless. They are insulted and repay the insults with honor. They do good, yet are punished as evildoers. When punished, they rejoice as if quickened into life. They are assailed by the Jews as foreigners and are persecuted by the Greek. And check this out, yet those who hate them are unable to assign any reason for their hatred. Do you see their beautiful distinctness? In that little paragraph, we learn of the beautiful design of God. They share a common table, but not a common bed. They obey the law, but they're citizens of heaven. They are reviled, yet they bless. The question for us is our lives beautifully distinct like that? Or is our tendency to conform? Is our tendency just to be angry? Is our tendency to revile them back when they are angry with us? Living beautifully distinct lives mean that we are to abstain and we are to draw in. We abstain from certain things, but we aim to draw in for the sake of Christ. Tertullian, who was born in 160 AD, famous theologian, he said it this way: we have a reputation for being aloof from the crowds. Christians wouldn't go to the gladiator games in Rome. I don't know if you knew that. Rome would have slaves and prisoners of war fight to the death at the Colosseum for people's entertainment, and the Christians said, we will not participate in that. Those people are made in the image of God, and we will not use your violence for our entertainment. That does not honor God. Most parties and feasts were held in temples where foreign gods were worshiped. The Christian didn't go to those parties, and so they got the reputation for being antisocial. Slavery was very common in Rome, and you could just murder a slave because you felt like it. The Christian would call the slave their brother, and they would invite them into their home and call them their equal. Eventually, it was a slave that became the bishop of Rome. Rome saw little girls as a waste of money. They added no value to family or to society. So many people would take their little baby girls and they would just desert them. The church said, no, she has value. She's made in the image of God. And we have writings that talk about early churches being filled with the singing voices of little girls. The church had a very narrow view of sexuality and marriage, and that was absolutely beautifully distinct in that time. Because if you remove all barriers from a culture, then the strongest in the room will win. And specifically, when you remove all boundaries and barriers sexually, it's usually men who win and women who lose. That's history. It's today. And in Rome, men had multiple mistresses. Yet the Christians said, I'm going to marry one woman and I'm going to love her like Christ loves his bride. I'm going to honor her and cherish her and value her. The church displayed the greatest show of friendship and love to those around him. In one writing, someone said, the Christians love each other before they even know each other. The Christian would care for the poor. If you couldn't afford a burial, then your body was just thrown out to the wild dogs. But the Christian would put on burial services for families who couldn't afford a burial. At one point, Emperor Julian, who aimed to end Christianity, said in anger, it's a scandal that there is not a beggar among them. These godless Galileans, they care not only for their own poor, but for ours as well. And the Christian was repulsed for all of those things. Yet, for those that God was drawing to himself, the Christian was seen as beautifully distinct. They saw the goodness of God through the life of the Christian. And I think that is why Peter says, be subject for the Lord's sake be subject for the Lord's sake. That God wants to do something through his people in the midst of human institution. He says, be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme or to governors as sent by him to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good. He's telling us that we need human structures, that God wants to do something through human structures, that they are ordained by God. Specifically, he says, they are to punish evil. We need a structure that says you aren't allowed to kidnap children or traffic women. You're not allowed to steal. We need rules, and if you violate these rules, then there are punishments for that. So we need human institutions that punish those that do evil. But it's interesting, we also need human institutions that praise what is good. That's interesting that he says that. What does that mean? That as we serve the community, as we are subject to this human institution, that they will see the good that is being done through us for the sake of Christ. That's what you saw with Rome. Eventually, Rome began to praise the Christian because they saw how their lives had an impact on their society. And just in case you didn't know, that is a reality all throughout our Bible. Particularly in the Old Testament, we see a thread of people that God called to work within human institutions to display his goodness. Daniel, Esther, Nehemiah. How did they act? How did they show God's goodness? They were respectful to those in power without relinquishing their commitment to God. They resisted, but they did it with grace. And they were willing to suffer the consequences for what they believed in. And over time, what happened? Think about Joseph in Egypt. He was misunderstood. And he was imprisoned. Eventually, the Pharaoh comes to him, sees who he is, see his good deeds, see the good solutions that he brings, and he elevates him into power. Same thing with Daniel. Daniel says, I'm not eating food that's offered to pagan gods. But instead of condemning them, what does Daniel do? He serves them. He honors them. He offers solutions. He was beautifully distinct. All throughout the Old Testament, you see people who have faith in God that are misunderstood. But many times, those who are trying to govern, they see the goodness of God through these people, that there is something about them that drives them to do good and to serve others, and they are elevated. And so here's the thing. As Christians, we are to be the best citizens that we can possibly be. We obey the law as faithfully as we can. So stop at that stop sign. Okay? Don't just roll through it. I do that all the time. We are to be a picture, an example of good. Now, to be clear, and you see this all over the scriptures as well, that does not mean that we do whatever the government claims is good. William Wilberforce, Harriet Tubman, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, all examples of Christians who defied the government because they set policies that disregarded God's design. So there's a great tension that we will always have when it comes to human institutions. And on one hand, Peter says we are to be subject to political leadership that has been sent by him. But on the other hand, he ends this text by saying, fear God. That there are moments that we as God's people will have to draw a line in the sand and say, this does not reflect God's beautiful design for humanity. We display salt and light. He says in verse 15, for this is the will of God, that by doing good, you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. That they're living a life of sin and they just don't understand the goodness of God. They don't understand how much better Jesus is than the thing that they're worshiping, the thing that they're indulging in. They're foolish. Their hearts are darkened. So may it be that our lives display such beauty of the gospel that it's not our lives that are exposed as false, but it's theirs. That their ignorance is exposed, that we love people so well, that we serve people so well, that we open up our homes so freely, that they say, I've been ignorant. I've been foolish. He says in verse 16, live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover up for evil, but living as servants of God. So he says, you're free, you belong to God. But don't use that freedom to say, well, I can do whatever I want. I can say whatever I want. I can treat people however we want. Specifically here, I think he is telling these group of Christians, don't use your freedom in Christ as a cover-up for how you treat and talk to those who are persecuting you. Yes, what they are doing is evil. Yes, what they are doing is wrong. But that doesn't give you the right to do evil towards them. Don't use your freedom to do evil to others. Doesn't mean you sway on your convictions. Doesn't mean you conform to what they believe. But it also doesn't mean that you forget that you are born again. You display the love and grace of Jesus. And then Peter says an absolutely stunning statement in verse 17. Check out what he says. He says, honor everyone. Everyone? That's what it says. You think they had a hard time with that? But what we just learned about all their rulers? Honor everyone. I want you to imagine that political leader that when they come up on your feed, you just feel disgusted. Maybe it's Biden, maybe it's Trump, maybe it's some other political leader. This is just as true for us as it was for them. Peter tells you to honor that person. They had Caligula and Nero. I have no doubt that they felt the tension in Peter's instructions. Honor Nero? Are you serious? He says to honor everyone. And then he says to love the brotherhood. Out there, I've got a world that is trying to influence me, that wants me to conform, but in here, I have a family. I have people that understand me, that are my teammates, that want to see me grow in the Lord. You need the brotherhood. Beyond that common respect and honor for all humanity, that there's a special love to be given to the brotherhood, that is us, right? And then beyond common respect for all and special love for Christians, there is a special fear appropriated to God and God alone. We are not slaves of men, and we do not fear men. We give them honor freely, we love Christians freely, and we bow to God's absolute authority at all times. Honor all, love the brotherhood, fear God, and then back to the basic. He gets more specific because he wants them to I think he wants them to understand. Honor the emperor. Include him in the honor and respect given to all. He is not to be feared, and he needs not to be loved as Christians are loved, but he must be honored. So first comes our absolute allegiance to God. Next comes our affectionate love for other believers. Then comes honor to the king and other believers. And I think he wants them to understand, hey, the king is not God. Only God is God. These institutions, God built them. And yes, sometimes evil people fill them. But Peter is telling them, we're going to honor them. Doesn't mean we conform. Doesn't mean we assimilate. But it also means that we don't slander. We don't despise. We pray for them. We display beautifully distinct lives, and we expose just how wrong they are. Yeah, maybe we confront them when we need to. Maybe we do what Peter did. When they put him on trial, they told him, hey, stop talking about Jesus. And he said, no, I have a higher allegiance. Maybe we're like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We will honor you, but we will not conform to you. Throw me in the fiery furnace. I'm not going to dishonor you. I'm not going to violently oppose you. But I trust my God, so throw me in the furnace. We will never bow to any other God except the one true God. And here's what we need to remember. Babylon fell. Rome fell. Persia fell. Greece fell. Every human institution has eventually ceased to exist, all except for the history books. The one kingdom that has never and never will fall is the kingdom of Jesus. So the best question that I think you can answer today is not how do we operate within a government as Christians. The best question that we can answer today is, do you really know the king of that kingdom? Do you know the king of that kingdom? The king who took on flesh and died for your sins. He paid the penalty of sin that you could not pay, and he literally was raised from death to life. He is worthy of your allegiance above all things and all people. And now we live out his purposes, that his glory may be known among every person and every institution on the globe. May our lives reflect the beautifully distinctness of what was done for us on the cross, that he died for us when we did not deserve it. He gave his life for us in an act of grace that brings absolute transformation. May we love and display that kind of beautifully distinct lives to the world today. So just consider how God might be asking you to display that. How is your life beautifully distinct to the world, to the human institutions, where you display, no, I have a better king, I have a better treasure, I have a better love? How do you show the goodness of God to a world that just does not understand? They may hate you for it, but they can never say that you weren't true, or you weren't honoring, you weren't loving, because that's who our God has been to us.